This painting by Caspar David Friedrich was considered blasphemous and caused a huge uproar in Germany when it was first revealed. And not only was it considered an insult to God, it was feared that it would ruin art and maybe even corrupt the youth. Unveiled in 1808 in the German city of Dresden, this painting stood at the center of a large battle looming in European culture: Enlightenment versus Romanticism. At stake was not just the question of whether the painting was good or not. Soon, the questions became philosophical. What is the role of art in society? What is the role of art in religion? And how should one pay glory to God? This small painting, for a brief period in German history, became the focal point of a huge debate that would change art history forever. So, grab some coffee, black of course, and let's see what the big deal was with Caspar David Friedrich's Cross in the Mountains. This video was made possible by the support of our Patreons. Click the link in the description to learn more and get access to exclusive material if you choose to support the channel. Thank you. Caspar David Friedrich's Cross in the Mountains, also known as the Tätschen altarpiece, is a pivotal work in art history because of the way it blended landscape painting with religious symbolism. This combination sparked immense controversy, and we'll get into the specifics of why that is in a second. Suffice to say, Caspar David Friedrich, by this point, was an upstart artist, but this painting cemented him as a key figure in German Romanticism and the history of art. The painting, in our modern times, hardly looks controversial. It looks like a regular landscape painting. We get Jesus on the cross, steep mountain peaks, fir trees, ivy around the base of the cross. The mountain summit is illuminated by dramatic sun rays, suggesting the presence of God. The framing of the painting is a bit more interesting. It has an ornate golden frame full of more explicit religious symbolism, such as an eye of God. You see, the painting was originally conceived as an altarpiece. This is where the trouble begins. Altarpieces are supposed to be the most glorious pieces of art. They are placed behind the altar of the church in the most important spot. They are intended to glorify God, and as such, their subject matter is to be taken very, very seriously. Usually, altarpieces will feature either an outright historical painting, such as a depiction of Jesus, Mary, or other holy saints, or the altarpiece will be more allegorical in nature, showing, for example, the Lamb of God. There were very strict, if unwritten, rules on the what and the how and the who of an altarpiece. It's not something to be taken lightly. It's not just a private painting you put up in your hallway or your living room. It's the center of a church, the house of God, dedicated to his glory. And what Caspar David Friedrich did with this painting, critics said, was an insult to God. He had inappropriately mixed genres. He painted an altarpiece and chose for his subject a landscape painting, a genre of painting that was considered the lowest of the low. Altarpieces should show religious, historical paintings, not a mountain range and a sunset. It was totally inappropriate, especially to pious Germans of the early 19th century, and one influential critic in particular even called it blasphemous, an insult to God. Something of a culture war broke out, with critics calling blasphemy and supporters interpreting this painting as a bold new direction for art. It's in the trenches of this culture war, fought in the literary magazines of Germany, that two great art movements, Neoclassicism and Romanticism, locked horns. The question that was really at stake is much more fundamental than just the interpretation of a single painting. What was to be decided here was the role of art in society and religion itself. In this war, there are two main camps: a conservative art critic named von Ramdohr and a romantic defender named von Kügelgen. Von Ramdohr was a Dresden art critic who published a scathing 22-page review of Friedrich's work in a German art magazine. He was a proponent of academic classicism, believing that good art followed a strict set of rules based on the masterpieces of antiquity. Good art, according to him, was good imitation first and foremost. He argued that art was subservient to rational principles, and matters of taste are not the domain of feeling, but of thinking and of reasonable judgments. A product of the Enlightenment era, Ramdohr was a strong believer in reason and its power to change things for the better. And if a so-called genius wants to come on stage and break the rules, then the rational critic should set him straight. As he writes, the critic becomes useful as warning to the genius if he wants to travel upon new paths, warning to the age when it has either dozed off through its blind belief in the prevailing artistic manner or fallen under the spell of a fantastic deception or surprise. Keep in mind that all of this is happening during an era in history in which the concept of genius was picking up steam. The idea that some artists or thinkers are simply so much above regular people that the rules don't apply to them. This is a very romantic idea, and much of the broader discussion on Friedrich and his art will be about the concept of the genius as such. Is there such a thing as an overpowering artistic or intelligent impulse such that the normal rules don't apply to them? In the 21st century, the idea of the genius has certainly won this particular battle. In the early 19th century, however, the question was far from settled. The pull of the Enlightenment and its strongly held belief in the omnipotence of reason was still very powerful. If reason can dictate what is good, and reason is accessible to everyone, then it follows that everyone, at least potentially, is equal. The only difference between any given two artists is the amount of practical skill they have. In other words, how good they are at painting. As for artistic vision, that is available to everyone. Just look at the old masters of antiquity and copy them. So when Friedrich did something totally new, it was not hailed as a work of bold genius breaking the rules, but it was viewed as an amateur trying to upstage the masters of antiquity and putting himself above reasonable rational judgment. Thus, Ramdohr found himself justified in issuing a warning to Friedrich and the other romantics. Don't try anything new. Stick to the true, the good, and the eternal. I don't need to tell you how this culture war played out, and which side won. You've probably never heard of Ramdohr. But he lives on in an interesting way. When he was a young man, he had a brief affair with Charlotte Kestner, the woman who would be immortalized in literary history by becoming the model for Lotte in Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther. She had rejected Goethe himself, and she was in turn rejected by none other than Ramdohr. Trivia aside, Ramdohr quickly became the chief antagonist of Friedrich's art in particular and Romanticism in general. The 22-page review became something of a cultural phenomenon, and Germans quickly spoke of the Ramdohrstreit, the Battle of Ramdohr, to denote this episode in artistic history. But which rules did Friedrich break exactly? Well, quite a few. First of all, Ramdohr claimed the painting failed as landscape painting because Friedrich deviated from the rules set out by masters of the past, such as Nicolas Poussin and Claude Lorrain. The work does not adhere to the classical principles of composition, such as balance, harmony, and a smooth progression into spatial depth. Instead, Friedrich's work features an abrupt jump from foreground to background, and exaggerated natural elements which prioritize symbolic and emotional effects over naturalistic coherence. For example, the rays of sunlight are obviously exaggerated, while the ivy at the base of the crucifix could not grow naturally on a mountaintop like that. So Friedrich is distorting nature to fit his allegorical designs. But that ruins the entire point of using nature to create allegory. If you're going to use nature to make an allegory, you should use natural elements, not invent stuff that isn't there and make it unnatural. Ramdohr sees this as a betrayal of what he calls the most characteristic advantages of landscape painting, which should depict nature in an orderly, idealized manner reflective of classical ideals. But beyond the merely technical is his main point of contention. Friedrich is mixing genres to the point of blasphemy. He is using a landscape painting to depict a religious image. Ramdohr wrote that it's a veritable presumption if landscape painting were to sneak into the church and creep onto the altar. He was a strict believer in form, rules, and hierarchy, and that civilization as a whole functions only because of form and hierarchy. And this romantic overstepping of the boundaries of art and mixing of different genres was not just an artistic faux pas, it was a danger to society at large. As a work of Romanticism, Ramdohr said the work is related to a spirit that is the unfortunate spawn of the present age and the dreadful omen of a rapidly onrushing barbarism. This is why he felt the need to attack the piece in the first place. He opens his review by saying he feels bad about attacking a contemporary up-and-coming artist, but he felt like he needed to speak out because he saw in art of this kind the warning signs of a disintegration of social mores and artistic standards. In other words, he felt like he needed to save the world from this great evil, this new kind of romantic art. He views Cross in the Mountains as blasphemous because it attempts to elevate a landscape painting, a genre traditionally associated with secular, earthly representation, to the status of a religious altarpiece, a role reserved for sacred art in Christian worship. For Ramdohr, this appropriation is inappropriate and disrespectful to the sanctity of religious art, as it conflates the profane, the landscape, with the sacred, the altar, thus undermining the church's authority and the traditional hierarchy of artistic genres. Moreover, Ramdohr criticizes the painting's allegorical content as ambiguous and overly subjective. Friedrich departed from well-established allegorical conventions. He did not use pictorial language in his painting in a way that was easy to read. He essentially counted on the viewers for having a very strong, subjective emotion when viewing the painting. And from what we know of what happened during the first exhibition of the painting, Friedrich was very successful at that. But for Ramdohr, this subjective experience, the hallmark of Romanticism, threatens the rational clarity of Enlightenment aesthetics by promoting irrational, individualistic interpretations over objective, universal standards. He fears that Friedrich's work, by inviting viewers to project personal meanings onto its symbols, risks leading the public astray from established artistic and moral norms. Again, Ramdohr presents himself as the guardian of good and proper morals in German society. Ramdohr seems to say, if we allow this kind of artwork into our culture, what kind of society are we promoting? He believes the critic's role is to uphold rational rules and to protect the public from being swayed by subjective emotional responses to art. His critique reflects a broader anxiety about Romanticism's challenge to the Enlightenment. All the accomplishments of the Enlightenment, faith in reason, order, and universal principles, seemed to hang in the balance. That's why Ramdohr felt an onrushing barbarism. The Enlightenment is rational, and it's therefore civilized. Romanticism was irrational, and was therefore uncivilized and barbaric. Of course, Ramdohr lived a long time ago. Romanticism was victorious. It exerted a huge influence on our culture today and gave us many amazing artworks, from literature to painting to music. But perhaps most importantly of all, it gave us the modern concept of the genius, the idea that some humans are simply better than others, so much more so, in fact, that they are allowed to break well-established rules in order to bring their own particular artistic vision to life. And that is exactly what Friedrich did when he painted the cross in the mountains. And what about the charge of blasphemy? Does this painting insult God? Well, first of all, not long after Romanticism's march through art history, God would be declared dead. So is the question even meaningful? I want to leave you with a quote from Friedrich himself, the only time he ever publicly spoke about the meaning of one of his paintings, and I'll let you decide for yourself. Jesus Christ, nailed to the cross, is turned to the setting sun, here the image of the totally enlivening Father. With Christ dies the wisdom of the old world, the time when God the Father wandered directly on earth. This sun set, and the world was no longer able to apprehend the departed light. The evening glow shining from the pure noble metal of the golden crucified Christ is reflected in gentle glow to the earth. The cross stands raised on a rock, unshakably firm as our faith in Jesus Christ. Around the cross stand the evergreens, enduring through all seasons, as does the belief of man in him, the crucified. Thank you for watching. A big thank you goes out to our patrons who keep the channel alive with their generous support. If you want to support the work we do here and get access to exclusive content, take a look at Patreon and consider supporting us. If not, your likes, subscribes, and comments are very much appreciated. A few days ago, I had a 2-hour conversation with Essential Salts, a host of the Nietzsche podcast, where we talked about Nietzsche, Wagner's Parsifal, the role of art in society, and Schopenhauer. The audio is available on Patreon for subscribing members. And one final plug, consider following me on Twitter for updates, video sneak peeks, and banger tweets. With all of that said, again, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.